Whilst browsing the internet, it is difficult to avoid the Japanese rail network. Coverage of it is almost unfailingly positive, whether it be a company sincerely apologising after a train departed 20 seconds early, or YouTube videos praising the system's 1980s privatisation. However, nothing is ever this simple. The situation is extremely complicated, so I feel I must preface this video by clarifying that I do not think that the Japanese rail network is bad as such. Indeed, it is an operational marvel. The punctuality figures of JR East, the country's largest railway, record staggeringly low average delays, and the large domestic train manufacturing industry is impressive, as is the system's cleanliness. However, portraying Japan as having a perfect rail network, whether by explicitly stating or more subtly implying it, is a damaging pursuit, hindering our own ability to improve. For the media we consume appears to have permeated into our perceptions. Before making this video, I held a survey of you, my channel subscribers, presumably a demographic that knows a little more than average about the realities of rail, yet a majority still agreed with the statement, Britain's railways could never exceed the current Japanese standard. But it's obvious that they're not going to be perfect. So, when I first started writing this video, I was uncertain of if I should even make it. I want to be a positive channel, and surely no one seriously has a completely unrealistic view of Japanese trains. But as my research continued, I began to realise that there are many aspects of the country's railways that, if not quite deal-breakers, are certainly worth knowing about. If you're an expert in them, this might not be particularly new for you, but you're not really the target audience. Plenty of other people, though, could certainly do with a more well-rounded view of the Japanese rail network. From the 1960s, competition from other modes, in particular the motor car, massively reduced the profitability of the then state-owned Japan National Railways, or JNR, a similar predicament faced by most railways across the world at the time. By 1985, JNR was receiving 600 billion yen, or, in modern British terms, about £8.7 billion in annual subsidy. In 1987, fearing costs would spiral even further, the Japanese government split the passenger side of JNR up into 6 private JRs, gigantic, vertically integrated companies that controlled everything apart from freight in their allocated region, including infrastructure management. The 14 trillion yen taxpayer debt incurred as part of this privatization was deemed a long-term investment. And, well, the privatization of JNR did quickly appear to be a success. Annual passenger numbers grew twice as fast as before, and most of the JRs actually were able to turn a profit. Certainly, the privatisation of JNR was considerably better thought through than the franchise system of British Rail. However, to attribute the success of the JRs to miraculous privatisation efficiencies alone is a naive assumption, to say the least. Perhaps the main reason for their success is the fact that the JRs do an awful lot more than just run trains. JR East, for example, only sees 56% of its revenue come from transportation, with the rest being made from its considerable real estate portfolio, numerous shopping centres, luxury hotels, and data marketing services. This is clearly an effective way for a railway to increase revenue, and probably should be pursued to some degree. However, when your railway company's aim for the upcoming years is not merely to run a better service, but rather to bring about affluent lives for all people, one cannot help but wonder if this is perhaps a little excessive for a single, private organisation. My initial instinct was that this was merely a corporate branding exercise, but no, JR East aims to literally propose new lifestyle ideas, creating real ex-digital lifestyles, introducing showrooms to railway stations, and opening healthcare services. None of this is inherently wrong. After all, the broader corporate culture in Japan appears, to my untrained eye at least, much healthier than here in the West, and a lot of their proposed ideas do make some sense. Equally, though, it would also be wrong to place too much trust in the benevolence of the JRs. Upon privatisation, around 7,600 workers were quietly not rehired. The government eventually found jobs for 5,000 of them, some on the railway, others in different sectors, but over 1,000 were nonetheless dismissed with minimal support. Of the workers who did remain, most faced heavy pressure to leave their unions, and many did. Those who did quit them were considered far more favourably than their colleagues. But of course, is this entirely relevant? Are staff nowadays actually losing out here? Are there any tangible consequences of this? Well, JR East plans to cut 4,000 jobs by 2027, and staff are often subject to disciplinary action for even the slightest delay, and this is more than tea with no biscuits. Osamu Yomono, a senior representative for the JR Soren Union, claimed that JR West drivers were subjected to months of education in which they were surrounded by superiors, verbally insulted, forced to write meaningless reports, abused, and even subjected to public humiliation, like being forced to stand on platforms and greet incoming drivers. Others suffered worse, like Masaki Hattori, who, according to this Guardian piece, was reportedly placed in a tiny office and continuously yelled at by managers after he made an unscheduled 60-second stop to conduct routine safety checks. At the end of the third day, 44-year-old Mr. Hattori, a driver with 20 years on the job and a hitherto unblemished record, told friends he was near breaking point. He was found hanged at his home the following day. This toxic culture came to a head in 2005, when a packed commuter train derailed and smashed into an apartment block, killing 106. It later emerged that the 23-year-old driver, who died, had departed the last station 90 seconds late and had taken a corner well above the speed limit, after being given 13 days of re-education for an earlier mistake. This is not necessarily unique to the railways, of course. Regardless of how widespread it genuinely is, Japan is infamous for karoshi, or death by overworking. Whilst this doesn't excuse the JRs exactly, lessons have been learned since 2005, and there are now measures in place to prevent a repeat of that year's tragic derailment. Now, therefore, one could ask why this matters. Yes, it's obviously not great that rail workers were, and likely still are, subjected to intense working conditions, but the railway exists to serve the passenger, and if they're getting a better service, then can there really be much cause for complaint? Ignoring the almost heartlessness of that argument, it is an interesting proposition, and there is some nuance to be held here. Cutting staff decreases costs, and extremely high staff standards do increase punctuality, a worthy trade-off in some people's eyes. But even though there is room for personal interpretation, Japan is clearly still not a model for all aspects of industrial relations. However, that very viewpoint of poor staff treatment being acceptable depends on an underlying assumption, that the passenger has an unrivaled experience in Japan, and that itself can certainly be called into question. The country is not free from the fare rises the rest of the world is subjected to. The JR Pass, for example, saw a 70% price hike in 2023, and whilst the pass is generally aimed at foreign tourists, the equivalent ticket in Europe, the Interrail Pass, has seen no major price increases recently, and actually real terms decreases, with a number of high-profile sales and a shifting of age brackets to allow more people to travel on youth fares. Increases have been more modest on regular Japanese tickets, but they have still taken place. Prices aside, the quality of Japanese rail is still not utopian. Yes, the system in Tokyo is highly impressive, but it's not in a different league to many other world cities. Take coverage, for example. A look at the Tokyo Rail and Metro map does appear to confirm that the city has an extremely extensive rail network, especially when placed next to, say, London's rail and tube map. However, it must be remembered that Tokyo is a gargantuan city, the largest in the world in fact, and around 4 times the size of London. Now, these are schematic maps, so obviously don't take this too seriously, but by overlaying the maps to a very vague scale, it becomes clear that London's tube map covers a much smaller area, and the gaps between lines aren't anywhere near as large as they appear. This is, again, a somewhat unscientific comparison, but it is something to bear in mind when looking at maps. Scale is everything. Of course, though, the quality of rail is much more than just track mileage. But in this case too, Transport for London, in my opinion, does a far better job at wayfinding, branding and integration, with connections between modes and lines being, in many cases, seamless. Again, compare these maps, and this is the modern-day tube map, a design often considered an abomination. There are other areas where London can be said to perform better as well, such as station architecture. Britain in general, but London especially, has some absolutely beautiful stations, to an extent that Japan can't really match. Yes, there are some pleasant stations, but it's nothing like the situation in Britain, where thousands of people daily walk through some of the most spectacular buildings in the world and think nothing of it. Take this clickbaity article listing the 7 most beautiful train stations in Japan. Yes, some of these are very nice, but they couldn't even get to 10, and some of those 7 are pretty lackluster. Meanwhile, the same website lists 12 in their UK list, of which the standard is much higher, and many more come to mind that aren't listed. Of course, aesthetics are hardly a major factor when assessing the quality of a system. However, they can play a part in improving the passenger experience, and it's just a nice thing to have. I mean, who doesn't like a Gothic revival station? This is only considering Britain though. Other countries and cities also do very well. Take Berlin, a city of only 3.6 million, yet one with a superb network of gleaming U-Bahns, S-Bahns, trams, buses and more, all very well integrated with each other. My general point here is that yes, obviously Tokyo, the largest city in the world, is going to have better railways than the north of England. But compared like for like, Britain's megacity performs very well, indeed better than Tokyo in my opinion, and that's the only real case where a fair comparison can be made. If you want to compare Japan to rural or provincial Britain, you have to compare it to rural or provincial Japan. Well, in many of Japan's peripheral cities, transport is unequivocally better than that in their British counterparts. This is mainly because Britain went through a phase of modernisation from the 1950s through to the 70s, which saw tramways ripped up, communities demolished to make way for ring roads or high-rise flats, and suburban rail lines closed down, with their land sold off to developers. Something similar happened in Japan too, but nowhere near to the same extent as in Britain, and the railways got off more lightly. What happened in Britain was, I think you will agree, a grave mistake, but of course one city in particular escaped most of the access. London. This graph shows the productivity of major European cities, with British ones highlighted in dark green. That's London, up there at the top. Transport, no doubt, has played a role in this inequality. I think this may well be a situation where a comparison with Japan is fair and useful. Someone more knowledgeable than I could do much worse than analysing the suburban rail networks of provincial Japanese cities. However, I think a study of mainland Europe is still far more relevant. Much of Europe's tramways or metros, especially in France, have been constructed relatively recently, and lessons could be learned from that to enable a better reconstruction of Britain's dismantled transport networks, something of a higher priority than improving our limited legacy infrastructure. Indeed, we even have examples of this at home, like the Manchester Metrolink or Tyne and Wear Metro. As for rural trains, the evidence I can present here is more qualitative than quantitative, but some of the standards put up with in Japan wouldn't really be tolerated here. By comparison, even Britain's dreaded Class 150s or 153s don't look too bad. And that's not even mentioning actually good trains like the Stadler Flirt or Class 158. Japan definitely excels at electrification though. It's not quite Swiss levels, but its 75% electrification rate is far superior to Britain's 37%. This creates some rather charming electric rail buses, but frankly, none of them are world leading. Speaking of Switzerland though, their rural network is extensive, comfortable, spotless, flawlessly integrated with intercity services and all other forms of transport, and brilliantly punctual. In fact, the Swiss national rail operator, SBB, is so confident in their punctuality that they publish a live map of all trains in Switzerland and their delays. Funnily enough, the very few trains that were delayed in this footage are suspiciously close to the German border. Indeed, their late running was incurred there. It's difficult to look at both Switzerland and Japan and still claim that the latter excels in a rural or regional setting. Even Germany, with its €49 Deutschland ticket, is arguably better at rural travel than Japan. Arguably. When DB isn't late. This is all a little abstract though, let's try and make things more relevant. The most frequent word used by my audience to describe Japan's rail network was efficient. This is undeniable. Any country with 12-minute turnarounds for high-speed trains is doing something efficiently. However, another common word was fast, undoubtedly referencing Japan's famous Shinkansen, or bullet trains. The Shinkansen is highly impressive, with a maximum speed of 320 km an hour on some sections and intensely frequent service. But it's not the fastest in the world. Various countries achieve 350 km an hour, and Britain's HS2 will run at 360, and have up to 18 trains per hour, more than the crowded Tokaido Shinkansen, and a train just over every 3 minutes. Outside of the Shinkansen, meanwhile, Japanese trains are actually rather slow. Japanese law prohibits any trains from running above 130 km an hour on lines with level crossings, limiting trains to this sedentary speed on almost every non-Shinkansen line in the country. By contrast, Britain's regional trains regularly reach 160 km an hour, and some even operate at 200 over level crossings. This restriction, combined with very curvy track, means that unless you live in a major city and wish to travel to another, most journeys in Japan are likely slower than what you'd be used to in Britain. Now, it is worth bearing in mind that many of the lines that would be that slow here have already closed, mainly as part of the aforementioned beaching cuts, so it's not a night and day difference. However, interregional transport, which remains, is still capable of being noticeably faster in the UK. On the 11th of March 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake struck off the eastern coast of Japan. This caused damage in its own right, but it was the ensuing tsunami that wreaked the most havoc. As you'd expect, the railways were affected, with several trains and stations being destroyed by the waves. However, not all of those stations have reopened, with lines like the Kisanuma being replaced with bus rapid transit after the tsunami swept away their tracks. This is not just a one-off. The closure of the Kisanuma line is indicative of a wider, alarming trend in Japanese society, that of rural decline and disinvestment, occurring whether an area has been struck by a natural disaster or not. Over recent years, trek mileage has been decreasing by an average of 50 kilometers annually, and since 2016, 350 kilometers of track have been lost, more than the British Southwestern Main Line. Surviving lines are to suffer too, with JR East's investor presentations revealing that they are considering de-electrifying lines, removing signals, and singling double tracks. Trains will be expected to run for longer without replacement. Driver-only operation will be rolled out more aggressively, fewer trains will run at peak hours, cleaning will become less frequent, security will be reduced, and station facilities will be stripped. Of course, some of these actions are sensible. With changing post-COVID travel patterns, it is reasonable to have less of a focus on peak hours, but most of them feel, at best, short-sighted, and at worst, actively reckless. Is it really prudent to remove electrification as JR East is trying to eliminate its carbon emissions? And should security really be scaled back after a recent flurry of high-profile assaults and attacks on trains? These are obviously issues in urban areas too, but the most severe effects of JR East plans are on rural communities. A declining birth rate and widespread anti-immigrant sentiment means that Japan's population has been shrinking since 2009, and much of this loss has been from smaller towns and villages. Naturally, young people in rural Japan feel as if there are limited opportunities in the provinces, and move to major cities, especially Tokyo, but this just exacerbates the problem as there are too few people to raise the next generation of children in these small towns. It's a classic spiral of decline, and a very difficult one to get out of, but I can say with some certainty that the closure of railway lines is not going to help. The situation that Japan finds itself in now is a fascinating one, and in many ways a warning sign for the problems that we and the rest of the world will face ourselves in the coming decades. Fundamentally, Japan is being forced to come to terms with the fact that its economy is not sustainable. A country cannot depend on one city sucking its regions dry forever, or asset price bubbles artificially inflating its wealth. It cannot sustain public debt at 260% of its GDP, or hope to grow with household consumption dependent on the elderly. All over the world, though, we have another sustainability problem to address. Our society is in large part dependent on the extraction of finite natural resources like fossil fuels, and to bring us back to transport, wasteful and inequitable modes like automobiles carry too great a proportion of our journeys. Changing this is not merely a nice thing to do, it's our only viable option, and if we are to learn from Japan, we need to address these issues early, before they become entrenched. With regards to environmentally conscious transport, Japan has done quite well in the past, but its other, more financial issues are strangling this progress, and the JRs appear to be entering a period of something between stagnation and decline. But it's not all bad, of course. Japan still does retain many of the rural and suburban lines we've shared in Britain, and railways are an integral part of people's livelihoods. Rail workers are respected individuals, with even cleaners being part of an elaborate performance of civic pride. Punctuality is excellent, operations are efficient, and subsidy is low. JR East's most recent financial reports are also becoming slightly more optimistic. But it must be remembered that railways exist to serve their society, and, perhaps in Japan more than anywhere else, that society's problems are intrinsically linked with the railway. The difficulties presented by this can be overcome, but we in Britain, or wherever you may be, have our own specific ones. And working to create a better version of our networks, using solutions we know work here, is a far more productive pursuit than forever idealizing an island thousands of miles away.